As Team Liquid buys Grim and looks to potentially sell nitr0, you can trade, buy and sell skins in one place with CS Money, one of the oldest skin ecosystems in CSGO, and with a constant 20% discount on their prices. Now, Team Liquid has benched long-time name nitr0, replacing him with former Triumph star Grim, who, yeah, listen, was very impressive during this online era, I have to say. On the Team Liquid side, remember I always break down roster moves based on, like, should you remove the guy, and then is this the right person to add? Was removing nitr0 the right move? I would say overall, absolutely. Like, he did seem lost as an in-game leader for my money when they took him away as an in-game leader and gave that role to Stewie2K, which I actually suspect they did much earlier in the year than they basically let on publicly. The team looked to have generally an identity crisis, and he individually didn't seem to be able to find a proper role and be a competent fragger, as we remember 5 years ago or so when he was in Team Liquid and he was the star player. So you look at Team Liquid's playing style, the speed that they play at, the role balance that they have in the team, the raw firepower, which is supposed to be whether the best team in history, and then the lack of championships after that last player break in August of last year. nitr0 contributed to many of those issues for my money, I'm afraid. He didn't actually show himself with this newer Team Liquid lineup with Stewie2K to be a Carrigan or a Stanislaw who can thrive with all these stars and pieces and move pieces around and change roles and just find something that works and call on the fly in the game. He seemed quite limited as an in-game leader in that sense, which is sad because, as far as I can tell, in 2018, he actually was one of the better in-game leaders when they were having all those second places and he had Zeus as his coach to kind of help him have... I thought he kind of had a hybrid of a bit of Astralis tactical control style and then using some of the fragging of, obviously, he still had Elige, Naf and Twists. He just didn't yet have Stewie2K. So I think he did a decent to good job for most of 2019. I mean, that might sound mad considering they won the 22 series in a row and they won all those events in a row and they won the Grand Slam in record time. But unfortunately, I have to say, I think a lot of that was individual excellence from the other players in Team Liquid. He did his part of it. He was sometimes pretty good, obviously, on overpass and AWPing, sometimes even fragging out with the Deagle, but he wasn't a massive fragger and they weren't a very tactical team. And as I say, I don't think he's a Stanislaw and a Carrigan where he was calling brilliant tactics all the time, even though actually, you know what, on maps like Overpass, he had a pretty good T-side, actually. But I think a lot of that came from having a good balance of how the stars played and then them playing exceptionally well. I mean, they had one of the best players in the world in Elige, and Twists and Naf at different times in the year have been up there as top 10 players, right? So one of my problems is, individually, since they decided to move him away from the IGL role, which I'll get to in a second, I think he's been quite underwhelming individually. I mean, his whole like reputation was supposed to be, this is a guy who can be versatile as your in-game leader because he can AWP, because he can rifle. He's obviously played in the past as an entry, as a lurker, so in theory he knows the different roles in the game. Now he's taken over as an IGL. Obviously he's even an AWPer. Like, in this scenario, he's supposed to be an overperforming fragger for an in-game leader. But actually he went from that in the past, into, if you look at like 2019 at their best, to after the player break of last year and through to this year, I think he's been dead weight in most of those categories. In-game leader, in terms of his versatility, in terms of his AWPing, in terms of the role, and then in terms of his just a raw fragger. He hasn't really been able to deliver in any of these regards for my money. And then you add in, well, what if he'd stayed as an in-game leader? Should they have removed someone else and kept him as the in-game leader? My problem there is, I've mentioned this on many talk shows and videos, when I was working Blast Premier Spring Series, the offline portion earlier this year in February and March, I could hear the comms of the teams. So for the teams that spoke English, like Team Liquid, I was listening for many of the games. I was shocked by how little nitr0 seemed to talk, how little he seemed to control his team, contribute to the tactics. It actually, quite frankly, now I find out Stewie2K is the in-game leader, I suspect he was already the in-game leader, or they were testing it. Because Stewie2K seemed like much more the vocal, active, proactive element within that team, and the one who was the leader and driving the team. nitr0 seemed like just, you could have believed he was the support, or just another player in the team, just occasionally piping up, or just giving a very basic set of information. And they weren't using executes and set strategies and a lot of key tactics and timings and stuff. They were just calling basic things, and then as far as I can tell, playing individually, playing a very loose style. Like, you can have this loose and stricter a spectrum. They were very much on the loose, and one of the most loose I've ever seen, and their comms were very messy and chaotic. And so I actually, I found that quite underwhelming, I've got to say. So For me, Team Liquid needs a more set leader, someone who's just better at the raw in-game leader role, and hopefully as a result, a more forceful voice, which should go hand in hand. Because if they have a system, an approach, they've played for years, they've had many different teams and players, they're going to know how to bring people into their system, how to set it up, and they're going to think they're right. One of the good things about the MSLs of the world and the Zeuses is they really believe they know what they're doing, that their system's the best, or it's the best for them and their team, and therefore they're going to implement it. They're not going to say, oh, you want to do something different? Yeah, you just do that then. Oh, he's just totally short-circuited my call. Well, let's go with what he says then. That is the route to madness. I mean, there's a saying we often have in esports and team games. It's better for 5 people to follow one plan, even if it's not a good plan, than for 5 people to do 5 separate plans or 2 or 3 different plans, some of which might be better or might be good, but you're not all on the same page. So that's why I think you need the really coherent in-game leader who to some degree is going to have a lot of control over the team. He doesn't always have to be the captain as well as the in-game leader. So I think actually at the moment, I don't mind Stewie filling that role because obviously it's going to depend how Grim frags because that could really change the team completely. So I think it's going to really depend on how the roles shape up in the new Team Liquid as to whether Stewie ends up being a good in-game leader, because he was actually a pretty decent in-game leader when he did the role in 2016. He wasn't actually the in-game leader when they won the major, as far as I know, it was Tarek. But I thought when he was an entry and he called around himself back in 2016, he was at times a star player. He was one of the better international players, one of the best NA players. So I could see him being able to figure out how to use the others. Obviously, he's already been doing the role, but he had nitr0 in his team, and nitr0 not as a fragger, not contributing much. With another massive piece, he's got 4 of the best raw skill players in NA, at least online. Now let's see what Stewie can do. I'm certainly willing to give him a chance. If that doesn't work out, though, I've got to be honest with you. I don't know who you remove, because probably not Stewie overall, because he is kind of doing quite a good role as an entry, and you haven't got that many aggressive elements in Team Liquid. If that doesn't work out, him as an in-game leader, someone else has to get kicked, might even be Stewie, and you've got to bring in a real in-game leader who's going to bring his system, like I say. So, by the way, one thing before I move on. Massive respect to Team Liquid for being willing to do this move. With the whole global lockdown, the lack of lands, the fact that no one's really doing much on the transfer market, especially not in the top 10 teams, it would have been so easy to say, we'll wait till we get to LAN again. We won't mess with this lineup in that way. It was a great lineup in the past. It's won championships. We haven't fully tested that can't win anymore. Now, I would to some degree agree with that. I still wanted to see him play a few more lands. But of all the pieces to remove, nitr0 felt like the biggest dead weight. And I feel like he's only gotten worse in the team since that period when they stopped winning. So I think it's fair, actually, to make this move now. And I'm actually very impressed that Team Liquid, just as they have in games like League of Legends, were willing to pull the trigger now on the move when they feel it's the right time, instead of just waiting until the guy retires himself, Skadoodle style, or eventually they have a mutiny in the team and people leave, or they force him to go. If you contrast that with the Cloud9 method, where they've kept a lot of teams and players and cores for a long time and really ridden it to the very, very end, I think that's because they've somewhat been affected by the idea of, oh, but fans associate with this guy in our brand, or we like this guy, or he's been here a long time. Remember, nitr0's the guy who's been in Team Liquid the longest. He's been in the team like 5 or 6 years or something. So he had this image within the team where people used to say he was the franchise player. Now, to me, that's nonsense, because franchise player should be like a superstar elite player. That's why he's got the franchise tag on him, because he is the face of your franchise, because he's the best, or he's a key player in your team. nitr0 might have been there the longest, but let's be real. The face of Team Liquid for the last few years is Elige. If it's not Elige, it's Twist. If it's not Twist, it's Naf. Like, it ain't... Or maybe it's Stewie for his spunk and his attitude when they won the Grand Slam, etc. It ain't nitr0 though, is it? He's actually bottom of the pecking order in that regard, even though he is indeed the longest tenured player. And so I actually worried personally that whole Captain America thing, and he is Liquid and he's the franchise, I actually worried they would believe that shit and that they would actually just keep this guy for a couple of extra years VP style and not get much of it, and as a result blow an amazing core of talent. That, as I've mentioned before, that core of talent of Elige, Stewie, Elige, Twists and Naf, and now even if Grim ends up being good, that's like a once-in-a-lifetime type of core in CSGO. Like, you don't want to throw that away until you know it can't work anymore, and that there isn't another piece you just bring in that makes that suddenly the best team in the world and blasting everyone again, which is not impossible. We've seen it in the past. So I think it's quite cool that they made this fairly swift move when it was necessary and when it was a solid gamble, but it's not like they waited until it was secure and we'll wait years and years and years. No, like, this is a gamble. Don't get me wrong. This could go worse. It could make Team Liquid worse, but it's a gamble that's a solid gamble. It's not necessarily a good one or a very good one, but I get that. Like, the upside matches the downsides. And as a result, if the upside works out, I think they will actually end up potentially being a much better team. So let's look at that, the Grim side of the equation. Should they have added Grim? Right, being as we're in an era where you can only play online, he was an obvious name to pick up. He was probably, outside of Team Liquid and EG, the best player in the NA region, not just including NA teams, in terms of online play. The guy was a monster. He was fragging huge against seemingly every opposition with much worse teammates, without a proper team, without, I mean, talking about like tier 1 LAN level team with real in-game leader and teammates and experience. He was the star of stars. He looked very, very good. And he was clearly the star of that Triumph team that was getting all these upsets and close games against otherwise top NA squads. Interestingly enough, we would have actually seen him at Flashpoint 1 if Bad News Bears had qualified through the qualifier instead of coming in later to take the FPX spot, because that's who he'd been playing with in the qualifier. I remember Maui Snake on the desk actually bringing this up, mentioning that he was going to play there, and that even he was, I think he was even supposed to be in a team that Grim was, like Maui Snake was supposed to coach a team that Grim was going to be in, or something like that. So he's a person that's been around in the scene, and this is his chance to shine, basically. I do think, just looking at online play, he is a very skilled player, really skilled. Like, he has great spray. I don't just mean good, he has great spray. His M4A4 is nuts. His AK, he just looks like he's bursting. That's how good his spray is. I don't think he is. I think he keeps spraying until he gets the kill, but he kills him in like 6 bullets, so it makes it look like he was just doing some like 1.6 style burst and gets those kills. Like, he looks really, really good. I can see why people are drawing allusions between him and Elige, actually. Elige obviously has very good spray as well, has very good M4A4 spray, and crucially, on the CT side, they both seem like lockdown players. They'll just hold a spot, they kill 1, 2, 3 people that are coming past them. You can't just bomb rush them in that sense. Then on the T side, they also seem to be similarly in the pocket of kind of the follow-up player who goes behind a Stewie2K or whoever else is going first, twists in the past, and they go up to clean up and use that spray and efficiency and consistency of play to be able to dominate and open up the sights and get the bomb down. So there does seem to be some similarities there, so I'm interested to see how the role balance will work out. Beyond his spray, he seems pretty good in clutches. As I said, he's good at holding. Problem is, what does that actually mean long term? Because obviously this is not a guy who has much experience offline. That's the real problem with this. That's where the gamble in this really, really lies. Aside from the normal gamble of will he work with this team and his role and confidence and will it break him to be in a top team? There's all that. But this is the issue. If we go back to offline play again, which we're going to presumably at some point in time, he is, compared to the level of Team Liquid players, a very inexperienced player when it comes to playing tier 1 big international lands, and especially, this is key, someone who, quite frankly, if they were going to recruit him, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this online era, in my opinion. In years past, 2019, 2018, if they wanted to move, you go to the players who are good or you like their start, but they've already got the experience. You know, there aren't any jitters there. They're not going to mess up. They're not going to necessarily be half as good against the same MIBR team if it's on LAN as they were online, where they're just looking like the dust and everyone off. That's the big gamble to me. I don't think you would have made this recruitment in the past, and you're just hoping it works out. As I said, also the whole role overlap. Let's see how they figure that out. Now, Elige is such a fantastic player. I'm sure he could give up space. Grim, you never actually know in his old team whether that's the role he wanted to play necessarily. I mean, he was the star player. That is the best way to get frags, is that role, the follow-up. So I can sort of see where he was in it, but let's see if he can be maybe more of a lurker in that regard. That's also one thing I have a mild concern about. In terms of role balance, is whether or not they're going to have enough aggression in Team Liquid. Because even though Grim will go in with the pack, the only real player they have in Team Liquid who mentality-wise wants to aggressively push in and go in was actually Stewie2K. Twists seems himself naturally to gravitate more towards being a lurker and be good in clutches. Elige obviously is more of like a mid-round type player. Grim now is getting added to that. Naf's a little bit more passive and is a very good lurker and can sometimes be the AWPer. There aren't that many aggressive elements for such a skilled team, and for a team that I'm sure most people agree with me. I liked them at their best last year, when they were up-tempo, when they would hit the site like a brick wall. They didn't need utility because it was just a bunch of aimers running in, shooting you, wrecking the site, and there was nothing you could do about it. If they go slower, as they often did when they played Astralis, they look like, I would say, like 75% as good a team. They don't look as effective, and it throws a bunch of the players off in terms of performance and whether they look actually good at their role, quite frankly. So one thing I will say is the reason why I don't think the downside of him being so inexperienced is a killer completely is, listen, it might take him some time to adapt. Maybe it'll mean the first 3 months and the first 6 months aren't as good as they otherwise would be. But he's the kind of player where the raw potential in terms of what he's shown online, quite consistently online and with way worse teammates against much, much better opposition, suggests to me he's the kind of player who eventually is going to be a good LAN player. I mean, that just seems, unless there's something massively psychologically wrong with the guy, it's just going to happen eventually. The question is, how will he adjust to it and how quickly? Because remember, he's not just going to lands. Like when people join a team that goes to a LAN and comes 13th to 16th and they get one game against a top team, one game against a lesser team, and then they go, oh, it's unfair, these formats. He's getting thrown in there with Team Liquid. Like this guy might be playing loads of matches, massive sample size. So on the one side, good news is that'll give him a chance to level up. The downside is he's going to get thrown in the deep end. He's getting the old baptism of fire, all the cliches. He's going to basically have to go and he's going straight to the NFL from high school in this scenario. He's not playing college football. He just has to go in there and see those monster linebackers coming at him and see people coming over the middle, safeties just coming to take his head off. And he's used to the guy being a foot smaller, way shorter, like way less quick, less aggressive. And he's just going to have to adapt instantly online. So listen, the skills are there online, but let's see what happens when we go offline. Now, one of my issues I have with this move is, if it wasn't Grim, there are eligible people, but I've just got to say this right now. If your name is Wardell or your name is Dapper, dude, this could have been you. If you'd have stuck around and you haven't gone to Valorant, Wardell especially, I don't think Wardell only could have been this player. I think he should have actually been the player over Grim to be recruited to Team Liquid. I would have recruited Wardell, made him the primary AWPer, and that would be a very powerful team. I think that could actually be immediately good, because I already know Wardell's good online. I've seen him play quite a lot. He just hasn't gone to the next level in terms of having a better team, because he was stuck in Chaos, and then obviously more recently in the Orgless team, which technically didn't even have an Org, did it? In terms of someone else, another guy who could have been on the equation, obviously, is Zeppa, the guy who's playing in Chaos. Maybe they just don't like him, I don't know, but he seems to have some skills as well. He's not quite as tenured overall as Grim, but they're both sort of from the same class. I actually think if you go beyond that, I mean, they are Team Liquid. There are some great players in the world who, listen, behind the scenes at least, either are available or there's been rumours maybe they go or they get kicked or whatever. Tell you some names I think could have been recruited here that, at least in terms of having less downside, might have been an upgrade immediately. So let's start with AWPers, right? That's one of the issues in the team. nitr0 was trying to be the AWPer, he wasn't very good at it by the end. Beyond that, you have Naf do it most of the time. Stewie can sometimes do it, but I think he force it a bit too much. I'm not a fan of the others generally on the AWP. So personally, when I look at who's available, EG's just turned it around. So unfortunately, you probably can't get anyone from there. But I'd heard, maybe some lineups were considering like super teams that could have consisted of someone like maybe Cirque would be someone they'd go after. Cirque at the beginning of the year when he was playing much worse, but listen, a lot of people would gamble if you put him in the right team and change his mindset, he'll get back to a top level as he seems to be at now. I'd love to see Cirque in that team. I think that could be fucking incredible. That could be a world #1 team. I'll throw one out there people aren't thinking of. If you want an in-game leader and an AWPer, how about Fallen? No one knows if those guys will be in MIBR next year, 2 years from now. If MIBR got the chance to make a team with Furia, buy Furia's players, buy most of their players, wouldn't they? And if they did right now, would Fallen stay in the team? I don't know. I think he's kind of lost some of his in-game leader in terms of MIBR. But tell you what, you put him in this team with these weapons and his own AWP, which he could use, and he doesn't have to frag out. I think Fallen could be really strong in this team. It's one of the reasons why I was in favour in years gone past of them in phase potentially gambling and trying to get Fallen to come over and join, again, another super team arsenal of talents and have him as in-game leader, but without the pressure of having to frag that much. I think he could do very good things there. How about some other ones that we know have been available recently? How about Bobski, a super aggressive player, a guy with a big personality, cocky, likes to shit talk, probably wants more freedom. I think he could have been great. Obviously, the whole visa issue of getting over to America might be a problem. And now he's got in the Australis offer, so he's not going to take a Team Liquid offer, is he? I would say the two in-game leaders that are available, Lecro and Alex, should both have been considered. Alex, again, not a bad fragger overall. Seemed to have a very good idea of how to use one singular talent in his team. I'd love to see him with an arsenal of stars. The likes of the Team Liquid players, maybe he wouldn't do it because he wants to be in Flashpoint. The other one is Lecro, who might have gone to Mad Lions recently. Obviously was in NIP. People rumoured maybe he would go to FaZe. I think he could either just be an entry component and keep Stewie as the in-game leader, or he could be the in-game leader. And again, he actually is something somewhat like nitr0, a guy who wasn't an in-game leader before, adjusted to the role, had fragging that was way better raw aim on the AK and the Deagle, etc., than another in-game leader would have, and could contribute a lot in that regard, and likes a looser style. But in the case of Lecro, it's more towards nitr0 2018. It's a mixture of loose with some tactics worked in there. So I think any of these choices, if they could have got them, would have been good. Maybe they couldn't. They gambled on Grim anyway. So looking forwards for Team Liquid now, going forwards in the future. First of all, especially from watching a lot of the Grimgate demos to do this video, I think they could be one of the strongest CT teams in the world. They already should have been with the raw skills they had, but where you put Stewie and nitr0 was the issue with the team. So I think now when you add in Grim, they're going to potentially have 4 players you cannot run into. Like, these 4 players can all be the best player on the server. That could make your CT side amazing if you can find the right resolving of the Elige, Grim overlap of roles, etc. in terms of where you play the position on the CT side. That could make you amazing. And that alone, by the way, if you can be a dominant CT side in a world where the meta is making it hard to play CT side, and you can just frag out and keep people alive. Now, you're not going to keep people alive like Astralis does. You're going to trade people because you're gunfighting, but you could be a very dominant team in this game and you could really turn around your fortunes. In terms of their style, like I say, I don't feel like Grim's like a super aggressive player, but I hope that they do try to crank up the aggression. I hope Stewie2K, that's kind of his mentality for the game. It goes up tempo. It's more aggressive overall. I'm not sure they will be, but I certainly hope. I think that's the path basically to success with this core. I think, as I said before, I think Stewie2K overall seems like a better in-game leader on them, but they will rely massively on fragging again. It will be about fragging, it will be about brawling and gunfighting. So I hope that Grim can carve out his niche. Because, listen, Twist had his issues with role swap and role balance within that team and the post-player break. That third position player in Team Liquid often seems to lack consistency and not actually deliver the fragging that the third position is supposed to have. Because they're supposed to be a team where 4 or 5 positions do fragging above average for their role relative to the average for all the other players who play that position in the other teams. So I've noticed they've had their issues. They can always get 1 or 2 players online, especially Elige is perfectly situated. But it's whether they can get that third player. And then let's forget about 4 and 5 for now. But if they can get integrated, great. So I still think it's a monster roster. If anything, it's an even more skilled roster online, at least. I don't know yet for offline. And if he becomes a legit offline player, this could be the next chapter of Team Liquid. Just as 2018 was very good, but lots of finals and no championships, really. Then you come to 2019, bunch of championships, best in the world, but then it falls away. And it was a hot period of like 5 months. Now you come to 2021. Maybe Grim comes to play. Maybe he finds the way to coexist with Elige. They get more fragging. The roles fit them better. They play a little bit more tempo, massive CT sides. That could be the recipe for the #1 team in the world.
Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Andrew, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride. GG, motherfuckers.
This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Whattathings, Spencer Green, Soliko, Dean Tanglis, Jack Hanna, Hades, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to put a question to me in my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers for my upcoming content? Or maybe to even take part in an online esports discussion with moi? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.